Well, good afternoon from me, Brian Gerrish, and Mike Robinson in the UK Column Live studio in Plymouth, England. And we've got another 30 minutes news programme for you today. We're going to home in on the Lords reform, which we believe is a critical area of government policy at the moment that is not being accurately reported in the mainstream press. So we'll be coming on to that in a minute to have a look at it in detail. We've got a guest in the studio today. That's Mr. Tony Shell, who is also going to comment on the Lords reform issue. But excuse me, before we get on to that, I'd just like to comment on a couple of issues in the mainstream press today. We've got G4S security, of course, where finally the mainstream press and media have picked up on failings within the company. Now, we are quite interested in the fact that alternative media was reporting these serious failings by G4S literally weeks before anything was appearing in the mainstream media and press. And this really shows us the power of alternative media. So thank you to all of you who've tuned into the UK Column Live this afternoon. But of course there are many other stations that are now coming online reporting because of the failure of organisations such as the BBC to report truthfully what's actually happening in the country. I've got two stories which really work back to back, because whilst G4S is failing dramatically to implement an appropriate level of security for the Olympic Games, we've also got David Cameron back on the subject of Iran, and we've also had recently Sir John Sawyers, head of Secret Intelligence Services, MI6, commenting on this issue. So at the moment in Britain we have the bizarre situation where David Cameron's government is incapable of providing security for the Olympic Games. We have given that task to a private security company, G4S, that has failed to provide the 17,500 security personnel that it was tasked within the £284 million contract. We're now having to bring in 3,500 British forces to help bolster their failings. This is, of course, more men being taken from a British army which is about to be cut by 20,000 men. So whilst David Cameron at the moment is busy cutting the British army to the bone and ensuring that it becomes more and more difficult for the British Army to defend this country properly, we also have the same David Cameron talking about what action he's going to be taking against Iran. And there seems to be a big hole in the middle of these two subjects. The story for Sir John Sawyers is that he's claiming that thanks to action by MI6 together with American security services and Israeli security services, they have been able to stop progress by Iran in creating nuclear weapons, and that we should be grateful for the work carried out by MI6. But he goes on to say that nevertheless it's expected that Iran will have nuclear weapons within 2 years, and thus they have only managed to delay any decision by the British government to attack Iran. What is particularly interesting with Sir John Sawyer's comments is that he continually refers to problems with American and Israeli security, to the extent that one has to ask whether his true agenda is to work for the British people in ensuring that it is Britain that is protected and the British people that are protected, or are his interests really lying both with the Israelis and the Americans. We will wait to see how this subject develops, but it does appear clear that whilst we're incapable of providing proper security at the Olympic Games, the government is now moving along a path to take some form of preemptive strike against Iran. Okay, well, we'll now move on to the subject of House of Lords reform. One of the key issues, Mike, on this one has been what Mr. Nick Clegg has been doing in the background, and a subject which UK column has consistently picked up on is the fact that whilst David Cameron is the man we continually see in front of the cameras and the man who's continually speaking on what is and is not happening in the country, it's Mr. Nick Clegg who remains hidden in the shadows and is clearly pulling strings on one of the most serious areas of this country at the moment, and that is so-called reform of the Constitution. So against that background, Mike, how do you see Nick Clegg's efforts on House of Lords reform?
Well, I mean, that's exactly right. Nick Clegg has clearly been tasked with constitutional reform, not just House of Lords, but he's talking about, for example, a new Bill of Rights. Well, we've got a Bill of Rights. The government is attempting to more or less deny that we have one, but we have one. And it was interesting that during his speeches in the House of Commons, Clegg keeps referring to this process of House of Lords reform being a 100-year process.
Yep.
And so it might be worthwhile just to look back at why that he considers that a 100-year process, because what he's actually referring to is the 1911 Parliament Act.
Right.
And that act was the first attempt to effectively remove the power of the House of Lords to restrict the activities of the House of Commons. And it came about because a bill was presented, a finance bill was presented to the House of Commons in 1910, which went through Parliament, but our monarch at the time, which I believe it was Edward VII, refused royal assent on that bill because he felt that this was not a constitutional bill. It was a bill to raise taxes.
Right.
And so he refused royal assent on that. Unfortunately, he then died, and the following year, in 1911, that Parliament Act was resubmitted. Well, just to clarify that, the House of Lords was preventing the finance bill from going through, so the Prime Minister of the day attempted to get the Parliament Act through in order to sort of restrict to limit the House of Lords' power to limit the House of Commons, if you follow me, right? So the Parliament Act went through in 1911.
Right.
That did restrict the House of Lords' capabilities to limit the House of Commons, but that stayed status quo then up until 1998, when of course we had the big Tony Blair reorganisation of the House of Lords, where they threw out the hereditary peers and started appointing peers. And now what they're talking about is this business of having an 80% elected House of Lords, that the individuals who are elected would stand for a single term of 15 years,
right.
And that the constituencies that they stand for will be drawn on a European standard. So Britain is already divided up into regions as part of the European project, and these constituencies would be along those lines. Now, as has been widely reported in the media, there's been a fairly big backlash on all sides of the House, because Clegg's initiative for House of Lords reform is supported by all three party leaderships, but backbenchers in all three parties seem to be possibly less in the Liberal Democrats, but certainly in the Labour and Conservative Party there are a lot of backbenchers that are against this principle of changing the House of Lords any further.
Right. If I can just come in there, I can imagine that a lot of people are thinking, well, actually, we've had a system where people can come into the House of Lords just because of who they are, what families they were born into. And what's being proposed is a democratic system. What are the dangers that you see of the system that is being created at the moment by Mr. Clegg?
Well, of course, we're having this word democracy bandied about quite a lot in the last 10 years or so, 10 or 15 years, and particularly with with regards to regime change in other countries. We know we've got to change the regime and we've got to put democracy in, but what type of democracy is it? Because in general, what we're looking at is a form of participatory democracy where yes, okay, you have elections and members of parliament are elected, or whatever your particular government form is,
Yep.
Congress or whatever it is. But what happens is that those people then don't represent the views of their constituents. Those people then tend to represent the views of charities or of financial institutions or of corporations to their constituents. So the policy seems to be set. What we call democracy isn't really democracy, because there's policy gets fed in from other places, from third parties,
Yeah.
that aren't the public, and then that policy is sold to the public by our representatives. So the democracy that we have is 180 degrees out really from where it should
Yeah.
be.
So the people that they're talking about bringing into the House of Lords, what you're flagging up is that these people are sold to us as being independent people. We should respect and trust them because they're not linked to historic families in the country. But in fact, what's going to happen is we're actually going to bring in people through the political system. They're going to be tainted by the...
Well, it's worse than that in a sense, because it's being presented as being these people are now elected and they're now accountable to the public. But of course, they'll be members of the same parties that are in the House of Commons.
Yes.
So what they'll be whipped the same way that the House of Commons is whipped. So where is the oversight on the activities of the House of Commons in the House of Lords? There isn't any. And then of course you've got the potential of an American style, Conservatives in the Commons, Labour majority in the Lords, and deadlock. Well, they're dealing with that by only having an 80% elected House of Lords, and the other 20% are appointed. There is no democracy in this. It's actually dictatorship in wolf in sheep's clothing, if you want to put it that way.
Well, it's Fabian is the correct
Exactly.
description from that, is that this is an attack on our constitution and a direct attack on the House of Lords, which is being done as a step-by-step process.
Right, but to answer the question of well, are hereditary peers or a better system? Well, in a sense they are, because assuming that it assumes certain conditions. I mean, it assumes that they're educated in our constitution, that they're willing to take the role, that they're there to serve. So no system is perfect, but that was a better system, because actually if you look historically, the hereditary, the reason that the Parliament Act was brought in the first place was because the hereditary peers at the time simply said, this piece of legislation that the Commons is attempting to put through is unconstitutional, we cannot allow it to pass.
Right.
And so the Parliament Act was brought in order to stop the Lords from doing that thing. Now, I've said this to many people, but I was sitting in a pub one day with a friend from South Africa, and so he's looking at Britain. He'd been working in Britain for a couple of years, and he's looking at Britain as an outsider, and he's saying, he said to me, it staggers me that the only people in this country that are making any effort to protect civil liberties and privacy are the unelected Lords, and he was making a valid point. The Commons seems to have an agenda that it's determined to push through at all costs, and I'm talking about the party leaderships here.
Yes.
And if we don't have this oversight and this separation of powers and this limiting ability in an upper chamber, we're really heading down some pretty dangerous...
By limiting, you really mean that the House of Lords has the ability to protect by having a second look at policy that's coming through the Commons and saying, no, this is not good. So it's a protection.
It's exactly right. So, and in the House of Lords, you would expect that in that chamber you've got people that are more experienced, have seen a bit more of the world, and maybe have a better understanding of how the country is supposed to be run than some of the people that are in the Commons, that are particularly in recent years. a lot younger. Our Prime Minister is a lot younger than the typical Prime Minister of 100 years ago.
Yeah.
He knows nothing. He has
Yeah.
no experience of the world, really.
Yeah.
So, what qualifies him to do the job? That's possibly a
Well,
different question.
we don't know the answer to that. We certainly don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Would it be appropriate to bring Tony in to
Yes,
just comment on that?
Yeah, I think, Mike, you touched on the key issue here, and that is that of the introduction of party politics into the upper house.
Yeah.
Very recently, Betty Boothroyd, who was formerly the leader of the House of Commons, raised very serious concerns about what's going on, particularly from the constitutional point of view. And one of the points that she made was her great concern at the introduction of a guillotine on debate on this issue. Now, I think that illustrates very neatly the problems of trying to introduce the current type of party politics that we see in the House of Commons into the House of Lords. It will introduce that type of political debate, plus the influence behind those political parties of various other interest groups. So I think it's very important that the House of Lords is retained as an authority on constitution and as an oversight on the lower chamber.
Well, of course, one of the things going on at the moment is that the Parliament, because there are a number of people in this game, but Parliament is busy telling us at the moment that we don't have a constitution. This is one of the biggest lies perpetrated on the British public ever, because clearly we do have a constitution, and we can show quite clearly that countries overseas, particularly Commonwealth countries, have used our constitution in order to build their own system of law. But Mr. Clegg has been incredibly outspoken, saying that we do not have a constitution. Mandelson is another one that's been pushing this lie, and in my opinion, what's actually happening is that they're now building on that lie to say, oh well, we now need something else to change the House of Lords. And I agree with what you're saying, is that the House of Lords is a key part of the process of freedom and democracy in a proper sense.
It's also very strange that they're introducing this now. That, from what I can see, there's no public clamour for these changes. People aren't out on the streets protesting. They want to change to the House of Lords or to our constitution. And as you say, the politicians are trying to avoid these issues of our actual constitution and what changes these could imply.
Well, I think they're doing more than just avoiding them. They're actively denying that they exist. I mean, Clegg has stated that Britain needs a Bill of Rights. The statement that the statement that he's made is Britain needs a Bill of Rights. Now he's not telling an out-and-out lie, in the sense that he's not saying the words Britain does not have a Bill of Rights and it needs one, but he is implying that Britain does not have a Bill of Rights when he says Britain needs a Bill of Rights. We do not need a Bill of Rights. And the key thing about our constitution that we've talked about many times before is that it's based on the principle that we have unlimited God-given rights, except where we're expressly denied the right to do something through some form of law. Right? So we are free to do what we like unless it's prohibited by law. That's contrary to other European countries where everything is prohibited unless it's permitted by law. Right? One of the key problems with human rights legislation that I see is that it's basically coming from the European idea that we don't have any rights except for the ones which are listed down on the human rights document. In this country, it's the opposite. We have all rights. Our rights are protected. They should be protected. They're constitutionally protected. And really, the Bill of Rights is there to reinforce that assumption. So what Clegg is attempting to do with all his constitutional reform, whether it be the House of Lords or the Bill of Rights, the new Bill of Rights, is to limit the rights and the protections that people have. And that's why it's such a dangerous thing that they're doing. And it's one of the key areas that they're damaging at the moment is this idea of the separation of powers. How do we describe the separation of powers in a simple way? But basically, there's always some kind of oversight over in any particular area of government. So whether it be the Commons, the Lords, the judiciary, there's oversight between them all, and they're protecting the public from
dictatorship.
Well, from any one section of government overstepping its authority and acting beyond its authority as the common purpose like to encourage.
Well, that's absolutely true. Well, I think there's an issue here and I think the issue is deceit. This is what I see, is that people have never really been interested in the House of Lords for what it is. It's been something that's been there. They've heard it mentioned. Lords have spoken out on issues, but people have been very happy with the system because the system has been providing basically an orderly society. It's been working. This is how I see it. And so the average person in the street, and I was one of them, I knew the House of Lords existed, but because everything's working properly, you don't need to know much about it. What's happening now is we have the government actually starting to attack the House of Lords. So they are attacking the foundation of constitution and law and order in this country. And they're not telling us the truth as to why they're doing it, but clearly what they are doing is taking Britain from a country based on common law into a new Britain where we are being forced into the European system of corpus juris, basically.
I also think that it's
Mike.
very worthwhile for people to look at the quality of debate in the two houses. If you watch on TV the quality of debate in the Commons, which is basically an adversarial party political type of debate, if you can call it debate, it's quite often just a slangy match. But you look at the quality of debate, particularly on constitutional matters, in the House of Lords, and it's very, very impressive. So I think people should take note of that, and I think they do take note of that, and they will be very reluctant to see the House of Lords just becoming an upper House of Commons with that same slangy match type of debate that goes on.
Yeah, and of course the House of Lords, I think I'm correct in saying, also forms the highest court in the land ultimately.
Well, it used to, but they changed that with the formation of the Supreme Court, of course.
Which of course was part of the tactics of destabilising the House of Lords. So what we can be clear about is that if we actually start to watch in detail what's going on here around Cameron and Clegg, but is happening across all three parties, there is a steady subversive dismantling of the constitutional structure of this country.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you would agree with that.
Yes. So yes, but so anyway, the reason that we wanted to talk about this today was because, of course, on Monday or Tuesday this week, the government did a U-turn, and because they realised that they couldn't get support for the timetable for this reform legislation. So the vote went through to create the bill, as it were, but they didn't get the vote for the timetable, so that can't progress. Now, what Clegg has said is that they will work on the rebel MPs over the summer period in the hope that they can get this timetable approved for the new session in September. And really, we don't want to let that just go. We've got to encourage. Don't normally recommend writing to MPs necessarily, because generally it doesn't garner a response that is of benefit to you, but there were so many MPs that rebelled on this thing that I feel that it might be worthwhile writing to the MPs that did rebel and offering support, because normally they get letters complaining about this or saying you didn't do that, but this is an opportunity to say, look, we appreciate
what you did,
you did, and we support it, and hopefully that would give them the encouragement that they need to stand their ground, because I'm quite sure that the whips are going to offer some pretty serious pressure over the next 2 or 3 months to try and push this through for September, and it really is vital that they do not win this vote. So,
well, one of the things that's coming to my head as this discussion is moving along is, of course, we've recently had the arrest and imprisonment of the chairman of the British Constitution Group, Roger Hayes. Roger was arrested early in the morning by the police, and some 9 hours later he's in Liverpool prison, having been denied all basic process in a court. So he was not represented, he was unable to defend himself in the court. There was no jury, there were no public, and there was no press. So at the moment we can see that we are moving towards a system where a sole judge, or maybe 3 judges in a court, are making decisions, and we are seeing a direct attack on our liberties, which means that we are now at the stage where you can just be lifted off the street. At the same time, we've got Clegg talking about working on MPs, and you've mentioned, Mike, the use of whips. Well, of course, we know that under our constitution, any vote that's taken in Westminster should be a free vote. This is one of the points raised by the British Constitution Group, is that the use of whips in order to blackmail, bully and browbeat MPs into make a decision is itself a process which is unlawful under our constitution.
Well, that's one of the features of the Bill of Rights. That's one of the reasons that they want to replace that piece of legislation.
Yeah. So, I mean, we start off by mentioning a little bit on Iran, but we've got the situation at the moment where Westminster is able to take this country to war. That's not a good expression. We've got the situation where we can attack other nation states, not following some detailed and free debate within Westminster, but simply on the basis of a cabal of MPs clustered around Tony Blair or Gordon Brown or David Cameron now. So I think one of the things that we'd like to say to viewers and listeners today is that if you have still not really picked up on this debate which is started over the House of Lords, it's incredibly important because it is a direct attack on freedoms and liberties. Yeah. Would you like to say anything else? We've got 2 minutes now. If you've got any other points, Tony?
I don't think so.
Okay. Anything to add on that?
No. All I would just say, I'll just make the point that no system of government is perfect, of course.
Yeah.
The system of government that is held up as being most perfect is traditionally the United States Republic. I would make the point that actually they are in no better position than we are. In fact, their constitution is being just as undermined as ours. Yeah. At the end of the day, the ultimate oversight of what politicians and what governments do is the people, and we've got to educate everybody that we know about what the issues are, and remind people that if they want to maintain their freedoms, they've got to take some kind of action themselves, and the people are the ultimate oversight of all this kind of activity. So get educated and take action is the key message. Okay,
well we can end on one example of that. Is recently I was summoned to appear at court in Spain to act as a defence witness. That was actually in the trial of Leanne Smith. I received a document from the Home Office which was delivered to the offices here in Plymouth. And it was very interesting because the Home Office document informed me that I was being summoned to appear at the court hearing in Spain. It then said that under British law, I had no obligation to appear at that hearing. However, if I did not appear at that hearing, I could be at risk of penalties under Spanish law. What was even more fascinating is it then advised me to go to a local solicitor in order to understand the relationship between those two laws. So I have recently written to my MP, who's Mr. Gary Streeter of the Tory party, and I've asked him in an open and public letter if he will explain to me how I can now live in a country where I'm operating under British law, but should the Spanish wish to summons me to Spain to answer any questions which they may wish to put to me, I have to obey that law as well.
And no protection from the UK.
And there's no protection from UK. So I'm looking forward to Mr. Streeter's response to my letter. But that underlines the fact that if we now had several million people demanding answers from their MPs, we could strengthen the resolve of those good MPs that are starting to get worried about what Mr. Cameron is doing to dismantle our constitution. Okay, well, we're at the end of our 30 minutes. Always seems to go very quickly. So we're going to thank all the viewers and listeners for joining us for UK Column Live this week. We'll be back online Monday at 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
And we hope you'll join us for more direct analysis of what's really happening in UK. Thanks very much.